You're watching Unrendered on IKTV. I'm Tony Regisford and I'm chatting with Mr. Oscar Allen. You can follow us on Twitter at iConcepts. Oscar, we can spend the whole program talking about these elements of change that you want to effect, and there's so many cultural things to begin with that, as you say, people's sense of self. And but my overall question to you is, do you see the PMC as being a change agent to the cultural things that we have identified? People accepting their culture, accepting themselves, accepting their blackness, their Caribbeanness, because not all Caribbean nationals are black. But so let's talk about it in the form of being Caribbean, because we're a special civilization, as it were, special, unique, and ennobled, or we can be for sure. Do you see the PMC as being a change agent for that, or are you more attacking the political framework? Is that where your focus is, changing the way politics is practiced in the country?
Well, the practice of politics is often based on what we call material relations, the economy, the way people interact with each other in bread and butter issues, the way our region interacts with the world in economic matters and social and cultural. In terms of affecting one or the other, I think one has to have a program that combines an attack on all, a reviewing of all, while you choose an area of intervention, a place where you start. We have not started with the cultural, except it's political culture. We've started with the socio-political situation in our country,
right,
which we feel does damage not only to the culture and the psyche, but even the bread and butter and future of our country. And so the PMC, at its launch, had the statement that people above politics, nation before self. Because if I take the last one, nation before self, currently our people, our youngsters, when they think of their own development and their own prospects, it's about themselves, not the nation, not the community. My career goals, my house, my car, my family. And that weakens the nation if there is not a context in which that is put. And when you combine that with a politics that says, my party, the nation is not going anywhere. And so that socio-political challenge faces us, and we wanted to face the nation with that. So that's where we began.
Right, so you began looking at the socio-political ills, as it were, and how you set about the PMC as an agent to right, to fix those things, to move people in the direction where we pull away from the current trend, the current path.
Right.
But I'm going to ask you to identify for me, what are the cornerstones of this political discourse and system that we currently experience, we currently practice, we're all part of? What are the ills that you have identified and that you would like to change?
Well, one of the symptoms of the deep ill is the divisiveness that the community suffers because of the way we practice our politics, our electoral politics, our national politics.
Was it always that way in your memory, or is it getting worse and worse as we go along?
Well, under the colonial system, when we were colonies, it was easy for our parents and grandparents 100 years ago to see who was the enemy. The enemy was an external force, somebody of a different color, the colonialist and the planter. And so, in a sense, we had more reason to be united.
Right. Because we were united to fight a common enemy who didn't look like us.
Right, who we could easily identify.
Didn't speak like us, didn't look like us.
But who bossed us.
Correct.
With the coming of our own politics from the 1950s, from the 1940s, we have begun to identify the enemy as the next party, the next group, you know? And that is insidious. Funnily, I find that even in the United States now, they're beginning to look at themselves in that way.
Yes.
The enemy of the Republicans
Are the Democrats.
Yeah. But I don't think it's parallel, that the two situations are the same. In the Caribbean, and if I take St. Vincent, we have allowed ourselves to regard our resources, our means of wealth, as limited and small. And therefore, one side, once it has the authority, doesn't think that the resources are sufficient for everybody.
So it is a scarcity mentality.
Yes. And this must go to my side, impoverishing and diminishing the nation. That is unsustainable. To change from Labour to Joshua to Mitchell to ULP to NDP, each time some half or so of the country is diminished. The PMC said, no, it's got to be a better way. Don't ask us what exactly is the better way yet. That has to come from our discourse among ourselves in the national community.
Right. So from a community level, we need to go and define what it is we really want.
And who we are.
And who we are.
Who is our enemy.
So you keep, we keep going back to that core point, you know. To have that conversation, you first have to accept who you are. It's almost, to move forward, let's define now who we are, so we know
And this is both
how we're moving forward.
This is both as a personal and individual level, as well as a society, Caribbean and Vincentian level. As the Cuban girl said, I am Cuban. We must reach that position where we can say, I am Vincentian, I am Caribbean,
Right.
and know what that means and what distinguishes us from the Nicaraguan or the British.
Now, let me again throw out something to you. And as we're talking about politics and political system, now we are governed, if you want, by the Westminster model. That's how we elect governments. We conduct the affairs in Parliament. Our Constitution is one that we were given, basically, by the people who once were our rulers, if you want, our colonial masters, to put it that way. And so none of those things essentially or necessarily address who we are. We have not had the conversation in forming a constitution of the people by the people. We've not had that conversation as it was in Plato's Republic, for example. You know, come, let's build, let's form a nation. I can't remember what was the quote there. And I in blessed memory, Simeon McIntosh, who I interviewed on this program on that very matter, was very passionate about us not being able to even articulate a way forward until we get to the core issue of defining our own rules. And in defining our own rules, it reflects who we are as and what we want to be. So I'm throwing all that out. That's a mouthful.
Yes, it is.
And but I'm throwing out to ask you: is the PMC getting in at that level, that depth, to really lift and start the change? Because we're talking about political change here.
And here you were speaking about the rules of governance.
That is the Westminster system. Westminster system, is
Interestingly
that
enough,
what we want?
Interestingly enough, in 1979, 78, when we were talking about independence, there was a conversation among the people about the Constitution.
Okay.
There were about 30 groups, young, old, who came together and drafted a major part of the Constitution and submitted it to the government. Prime Minister
It was Milton Cato at the time,
Yeah.
yes.
And it was quite different from the one we now operate under.
So what happened to what was submitted?
It was received,
But not enacted.
no, and not made a part of the discussions in Britain.
Interesting.
report from the
it's the first time I'm hearing that, actually.
The report from the Constitutional Conference in Britain had that document as an appendix, but it never entered into the discussion. In fact, the government at the point when they were forming their stuff regarded the group of people groups who presented it, including churches, youth movements, labor movements, as nincompoops. Don't laugh. So we have attempted to be a part of a process of systematizing our rules. There was also recently the OAS-funded constitutional reform process
Yes.
that we had a few years ago, which failed, again, on the ground of political divisiveness, what you call the Westminster system.
Became a yes/no vote, but it was really
Precisely.
a red-yellow vote. That's basically what it was in the end.
And those who were neither red nor yellow
Yes.
were branded as whatever.
Whatever, yes.
So making the rules ain't easy once the situation remains the way it is. Where the Westminster system seems to work, for example in Britain, you don't just have two parties or three parties contending. You have other institutions which frame people's opinion, so that you don't either jump up between Labour, Conservative and Liberals. Even they have to listen to the trade unions, the churches and other groups.
So there are a lot of community structures that underpin and guide the
And build the people.
political directorate. We have to leave this section here because we're overrun.
Will
by
we ever come back to
minute.
it?
We're going to come back to it, but I don't want to.
Not necessarily today.
Yes. Oh, you're saying you're going to come on the program again. That's music to my ears. But let's go out on a break now and we come back to speak a bit more about Constitution. Just a little bit more.
Okay.
This is Unrendered on IKTV. I'm Tony Regisford and I'm chatting with Oscar Allen, who will continue to be my guest when we come back from the break.